Today we have with us Alejandro Murguia, who's a professor at San Francisco State University in the area of literature and writing. We also know him to be a recognized poet and writer with many published books. How many books you have published so far?
Oh, at least 6+ books that I've edited, and magazines, and all kinds of work like that.
And this year he had the great honor of being recognized as the Poet Laureate of San Francisco, which has kept him on his toes all year long, running all over the city, doing presentations, representing our community, and it's a great honor to be interviewing him today. Again, this is Alejandro Murguia. So,
Well, good to be here with all of you.
So, how have you been involved with the mission over the years?
How or how long?
How?
Well, in all kinds of different aspects, as a community organizer, as a literary organizer, both in publications and in organizing cultural events around literature and just cultural events in general. So I've been doing that about 40 years.
So, where were you born and what made you get involved in?
Well, I'm born in a small barrio of North Hollywood called Porcasitas, probably the oldest barrio of the San Fernando Valley. But I'm raised in Mexico City. And so when we return, I'm about 6 years old and don't know any English or anything at all. I come like any other immigrant, right? But I'm native born. And I've been involved in these activities since I was about 18 years old, still in high school, during the time of the Vietnam War, which I think radicalized a lot of people of my generation. So from that time, 18, 19 years old, when I was in City College in Los Angeles, I was involved in the student group, UMAS and MECHA, and before those groups, actually. So I've been involved in both politics and literature since that time.
what brought you to San Francisco?
Well, I think San Francisco has a very rich literary heritage. And when I was growing up in LA, a lot of the poets that were influencing me, like Bob Kaufman, were based here in San Francisco. And San Francisco at that time, though, was also very much a working class city where working people could live and raise their families. And so it was very conducive to a young poet like myself who didn't have a lot of money, but you could live on $150 a month, right? Your rent was $40, $50, $70, and the rest was to pay for your food and some left over for cheap wine. And so you had plenty of time to write in that sense. Incredible changes, right? And we can look at any neighborhood in the city, I think, especially the southern part of the city where a lot of Latinos reside. But I remember well, for example, when I came here, that Bernal Heights was the most working class neighborhood, I think, in the whole city. There was nothing but working people there. And now you go to Bernal Heights and houses are over $1 million. I saw an article the other day that the median price of a home in Noe Valley was $2 million. And it's like, wait a minute, what working person could possibly even dream of affording $1 million home? And that has happened really, I think, quite rapidly in the past 10 years, maybe 15 years, where the prices have just totally gone out of control. So it's no longer a working class city, but I still think it's the most livable city, certainly for me, the only city I could live in the United States.
In regards to your participation with the arts and culture of the Mission District, what do you think are the most significant areas that you have participated? And I would say, I would even dare to say, what do you think is the legacy that you have created and leave behind?
Well, I think a lot of it was around publications that I was working on, although they no longer exist, right? They played a very important role at that time. Tintan magazine, for example, and La Gaceta Sandinista, two publications that I was very closely involved with. But on a larger scale, I think that the work at the Mission Cultural Center, even now, it kind of amazes me that 37 years after we first went into an abandoned furniture store, the place is still functioning, right? There's still workshops, there's still events, the communities, it's a great resource still for the community, and especially now with some of the gentrification going on, I think that the Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts, as the name has expanded, really helps anchor the community in the sense that, well, wait a minute, this is a spot for us to develop our culture, for us to develop our artists, and so I think, especially now, it plays a very, very important role in giving roots and culture and a place for our community to stand, the Mission Cultural Center.
I remember reading a few years ago about the Mission Cultural Center, and there was a publication coming out of Stanford University that actually stated that it was the most important Latino cultural center and the biggest Latino cultural center in the country.
I wouldn't dispute that, right? Without having a lot of facts in front of me, but you can just recall from your own memory, right? What other cultural center was still in existence 35, 37 years ago? The only one that might even come close, but it's not quite a culture center, would be the New York Poets Cafe. But it's more literature, whereas the cultural center, all the arts, from dance, music, and also I think part of the legacy of the cultural center is how many artists have kind of learned their chops there, right? Musicians like John Calloway, John Santos, Carl Perazza, just a ton of musicians and dancers that had been there, not to mention all the graphic artists, right, that had used that as a base for many, many, many years to not only establish themselves, but to train other artists and young artists and mentoring young artists. So that's also part of the legacy that nobody has really documented, all the great artists that have developed there and have then gone on to very successful careers.
So besides the booming of the prices of the house, what else has been a drastic change in the Mission District?
Well, part of that booming of prices have been the eviction of the established families, the Latino families that have been there for 20, 30 years. I mean, just last night I was on Valencia Street for the closing, the eviction of Encantada Gallery, right, that had been there 17 years. A great source of art and culture. We've done literary events there, poetry readings, art openings, exhibits, etc. And now it was evicted. Last night was the last night there, right? So part of that is very ironic that the culture and ambience of the Mission District that attracted all these newcomers, the first thing they did was destroy that culture and ambience, right? Totally ironic. Destruction of the murals, for example, Chuy Campuzano's mural at the Lily Ann building. I just went by it the other day. It's still a blank wall, right? So what was the point of destroying this incredible mural there, right? Well, you can answer that for yourself, right? And so it's been that sort of not just economic shift, but also a cultural shift, right? And now I was just telling somebody earlier today, well, I don't go north of 20th and Valencia Street because it's like I'm in Johannesburg during the period of apartheid, right? That's what Valencia Street has become, a very sort of segregated, elitist strip. But that's not what the Mission District has ever been, right? It's been always the opposite, very inclusive, very working class, right? Very culturally active, and a lot of that is being lost.
What is your favorite part about the mission besides the culture?
All the people, just walking the streets, right? Even yesterday on my way to Encantada, I deliberately parked blocks away and just walked down the street, right? Enjoying whatever's left of the ambience.
And shaking hands with old friends.
And meeting old friends, I think that's always been part of the beauty of the Mission District. You could walk down 24th Street, run into old friends, people you just met, meet new people, a very people-friendly sort of neighborhood.
some of the people that we interviewed, have mentioned that what they really miss, what's really becoming a thing of the past, is the family sense that one could find on 24th Street.
I would totally agree with that. In fact, I don't know how true it is. Two things. My own observations for a while have been that there's more dogs in the mission than kids. But someone told me the other day that no, it was some sort of figures came out that it's absolutely true, right? There's more dogs, and you see it on Valencia, on 24th Street, on South Van Ness, wherever. You see people walking dogs, but you don't see people walking children. And I think that's a real bizarre sort of tragedy, right? That the Mission District has literally gone to the dogs.
Yeah. What would be your most important memory that you have about 24th Street?
Oh, there's just many memories, right? But I do recall, for example, when I first came to San Francisco, standing at one end of 24th Street and being able to look all the way down, and there was only one neon sign on the whole strip, and that was Guadalajara de Noche. And I still kind of miss that, that sense of like, I miss Discolandia, for example, right? And that kind of intent epitomizes some of the change. Discolandia was like where we all bought our records. It was the first record store. We'd buy our music there. We'd buy the tickets for all the shows, Willy Colon and everything. And then when she closed about a year ago or so, it's now taken over by a restaurant that sells, I don't know, pork chops or something. I would never go there, but they left the sign on, which is kind of interesting fusion, right? The old past, but now totally new business. What can I say?
One of the images that always pops in my head when I walk by there and I see this Discolandia sign at the top and then Pig and Pie restaurant at the bottom reminds me of Walmart's at Teotihuacan.
Totally. And let me just add something about the Walmart at Teotihuacan, right, since you brought it up. But everybody, I thought, who had a vision of culture realized what an aberration it was to put the Walmart there. But then it turns out, many months after all of that, that in fact Walmart had been bribing people all up and down Mexico to get permits, and I wouldn't doubt if the permit for the Walmart outside of Teotihuacan was one of those bribes that were paid. And if that's the case, then I would say that the Walmart should be dismantled brick by brick and moved to someplace like maybe outside of the Alamo. In Texas.
One of the memories that I have of 24th Street in the mid 70s was the solidarity movement with the struggles of the people of Central America. And you were a pivotal person with Roberto Vargas at the time in dealing with the solidarity movement, especially for Nicaragua. What can you tell us a little bit about it? I know that a lot of people in our community, especially the newcomers and the youth, don't really have an idea what was happening at the time.
Well, I think one of the most important things that happened in the 70s and 80s was the solidarity of San Francisco, the Mission District, with Central America, obviously because of the large Central American population. But a key to that was the rallying point for these solidarity groups, which were the BART plazas at 24th and Mission. The one on the northwest corner was named Plaza Sandino, and the one kitty corner from it on the northeast corner, I'm sorry, I meant the southeast corner and the northwest corner, Farabundo Martí. And I think that history is part of what needs to be preserved. That one plaza is called Plaza Sandino and the other plaza is called Farabundo Martí. And I think that's super important that legacy be preserved somehow by putting a plaque, some sort of acknowledgement that those are the names of those plazas. It's not time to name them or name them new or anything like that. They have their name, and with a great historical legacy of Central Americans and Latinos and the Mission District in general. So at the Plaza Sandino, for example, not only did we start the very first rally from there, but later on during the assassination of Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, we would have candlelight vigils. I mean, it was a total gathering spot for us for many, many years, and many thousands of people eventually participated in those rallies there.
That's right. I remember many demonstrations that would go from there all the way to Dolores Park, and the entire length of Mission Street all the way to 18th Street was completely covered with people who were demonstrating and marching towards the park.
Yes. And so, you know, that's like I said, part of the history that needs to be remembered and preserved. And I would hope that, as I mentioned, that they be officially recognized as the names of those plazas. Of course, that it involves City Hall and all that stuff, but I can't imagine naming those plazas anything else.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've been walking down 24th Street a lot recently as part of this project, and what comes up is looking at what I consider some of the landmarks and some of the places that might not necessarily be landmark but become important places for the gathering of people, for the focal points of disseminating our culture. In one of the places, you know, if I begin to walk from the 24th Street plazas, bar plazas, the first place that I would see that was very important was, for example, the Café La Boheme, where many of the activists, where many of the poets and writers continue to gather since the early 70s, as a place where we see that energy really brewing and creating, in this case, a tremendous cultural movement for us.
The Café La Boheme is probably the first cafe that opens in the Mission District during that time. You know, before you had to go to North Beach to get your espresso and whatnot. But La Boheme, and it's in a key location there at 24th and Mission, and has been known, at least amongst the Latino community in the Mission District, as the Central American Consulate or the Central American Embassy, right? Because you could find everybody there. And we've had countless events in support of writers, in support of activists, a slew of events that have happened there in Café La Boheme. So I would certainly consider that as a sort of, again, a historical marker for our community, right? I think perhaps other places that would also be considered historical markers would, of course, be Galeria de la Raza at the other end, right? Mm-hmm. And even some, the mural, by the way, of Daniel Galvez on Van Ness, South Van Ness and 24th Street, right? That one of my favorite, that big, beautiful mural that's been fading, right? And so I think there's a lot of cultural markers along 24th Street. There's a library there at Bartlett, also, where we've done many events, and a beautiful building as well, right? And even places that may not seem so historical, but have a lot of history, like La Victoria, for example, Casa Sanchez, which has been there forever, right? The Roosevelt Tamale Parlor, forever, right? I think Babe Ruth had tamales at the Roosevelt Tamale Parlor or something, right? That's how long it's been around, right? And so I think all these places, or even now, like the Sunrise Restaurant, where we do so many events now, and we have such great support from, are places that need to be preserved. And I think in general, that whole strip of 24th Street from Valencia to Potrero needs to be designated a cultural corridor, a patrimony, not just of San Francisco, but really a patrimony of humanity in a way, because what you see now are people from all over the world coming to the Mission District to look at the murals. Balmy Alley, another example of a cultural patrimony that needs to be preserved, not just for people in the Mission or San Francisco. Go down Balmy Street any day of the week, you'll see groups of people from all over the world photographing it. So why not preserve it, right? Why not acknowledge 24th Street as a cultural corridor, patrimony of everybody?
Absolutely.
Now, of course, what will happen will be the reaction of real estate interests, for example, who, and I've been saying this during these past few months of these interviews, change is inevitable. That's life, right? Neighborhoods change, countries change, everything changes. But there's a difference between a neighborhood changing and a neighborhood being destroyed. And what's happening right now in the Mission District, the neighborhood is being destroyed, right? Mostly through economic pressure, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? The cultural heritage, the history of the Mission District, going back to the beginning of the mission, right, and the Ohlone people, needs to be preserved and acknowledged as an important part of living in San Francisco.
Completely agree. I see a big difference, for example, when the Latino migration took place to the Mission District, and it was because the Irish were moving out.
Yeah.
They were moving to the avenues, to the Sunset District.
They were moving up.
And exactly, they were getting new homes that were very cheap during that period of time. And so it was a very easy transition in which the culture, some of them remained and their culture was respected.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of conflict, but nothing like the one that we see now in which people are being evicted, forced out of their community.
Yeah, urban deportation, we
Yes.
call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's an issue that needs to be raised, not just in the public sphere, right, but amongst City Hall. I think it's time for the mayor and the supervisors to get up and stand up and say, well, what kind of a city are we creating? Are we creating a boutique city for tourists? Or are we creating a city of real people, of working people, a diverse city? Or are we going to be something like Johannesburg during the height of apartheid? Well, as I've mentioned, right, it's obviously being driven by economics, right? But there's no reason why there can't be a moratorium on evictions, right? Classic case, how come nobody at City Hall stood up for Encantada Gallery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a cultural institution, like I said, for over 15 years, right? In fact, technically, that side of Valencia is Scott Wiener's district, but he has not said a single word about that, right? So it's like, well, is it racism because Mia is a Latina? Is it economic racism? Is it cultural racism? Is it political racism, right? And I think these issues need to be raised front and center in front of these supervisors, like Mr. Weiner. Well, ultimately, as I've said, in some ways, the Mission District is fighting for its survival of its identity, right? If it becomes an all-white neighborhood that only caters to these so-called hipsters, although there's nothing hip about them because you got to be hip before you're hip. So they're really more lamesters than anything else. But if it becomes just a city for them, I think that would be a great shame and a great tragedy. Because as I mentioned before, people are coming from all over the world, right, to see and experience the culture of the Mission District. If the destruction of the murals continues, right, if the destruction of the Latino businesses continue, then it won't be the Mission District anymore, but a clone of the Marina District.
Absolutely.
And I wish you a lot of luck on this project. I think it's one of the most important projects going on right now in our community.